It is designed to absorb the ritualist's awareness into the awareness of a deity. So that for a brief period of time, as an embodied human, you experience God consciousness quite literally. And when you come out of that, you're fundamentally changed in your perspective on reality, on life and death. And you now have a deeply felt sense of connectivity to these higher order beings and their perception of reality as an ongoing, teleologically unfolding evolution.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. In today's episode, it is my great pleasure to welcome back author, scholar, and friend of the show, Peter McAdams, for a rich and far-reaching conversation on his upcoming book from Theion Publishing, Ritual and Epiphany in the Mysteries of Mithras, the Secret Cult of Saturn in Imperial Rome. It's an extraordinary and deeply thoughtful study of the cult of Mithras. Peter takes us through the ancient layers beneath Mithraic practice, its origins, iconography, cosmology, and initiatory structure, tracing a lineage from early Mesopotamian myths such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, through the cultic worship of Saturn, and into the esoteric heart of Imperial Rome. What emerges from his research is a profound view of Mithraism, not simply as a Roman mystery cult, but as the survival of a much older animistic, star-orientated cosmology. It is a vision of reality structured around spirit, faith, celestial forces, and the metamorphosis of the human soul. Peter takes us through the complex ideas behind his thesis, weaving in insights from recent advances in anthropology, ethnography, and comparative religion. He draws particularly from the Orphic mysteries to illuminate the metaphysical architecture underpinning the Mithraic rites. We unpack how the mysteries functioned as both a lived embodied practice and a carefully guarded initiatic system, intended to bring about deep spiritual transformation in their adherents. The conversation explores the mythic grammar encoded in the Tauroctony, the slaying of the bull, not as a static religious image, but as a dynamic performative act tied to the movement of the heavens and the soul's journey through the stars. In the Plus show, Peter also shares fascinating insights into the 7 grades of Mithraic initiation, each representing different spiritual and cosmic stations. We delve into the frescoes at St. Capua Vetere, rare depictions that provide intimate glimpses into the ritual life of the Mithraic initiates, and discuss how sacred art served not merely as decoration, but as an active living technology for transformation. Along the way, we touch on the challenges faced by modern researchers and practitioners in articulating and recontextualizing these ancient experiences in a world that has largely lost the language for mystery. We talk about the difficulty of bridging the gap between ancient participatory worldviews and the post-Enlightenment skepticism that dominates contemporary thought, and how, paradoxically, the sciences of anthropology and archaeology often come closest to glimpsing the ancient mysteries, even if they struggle to fully comprehend them. So expect a wide-ranging discussion that weaves together ancient rites of passage, the secret symbolism of the night sky, the endurance of spiritual forms across civilizations, and the vital necessity of re-enchanting our approach to mystery, spirit, and knowledge. We explore the ongoing relevance of ancient animist cosmologies, the fluidity between spirit and matter in the Mithraic world, and the subtle power of initiatory experience as a form of epistemology, a way of knowing rooted in the living cosmos itself. As ever, this is a conversation for those who feel the call to look beyond the material surface of things, to uncover the secret architecture of spirit hidden in plain sight, a journey into the heart of the mystery traditions that shaped the ancient world and continue to whisper to us across the millennia. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention that Peter has launched a new Patreon, of which I am a proud supporter. You can find the links to that below. He'll be sharing his writing, essays, and potentially some courses in his areas of research. Now, it's still a work in progress, but with Peter at the helm, it promises to be incredible. Further to that, Peter and the good people at the House of Zophiel are running a 4-day course on the Sola Busca Tarot in Turin, Italy. Now, this sounds absolutely phenomenal. It includes a study trip to Milan to view the cards themselves with Peter. It's a packed 4 days with lectures, ritual work, creative sessions, and having attended and spoken at some of the Houses of Feels events. I can honestly tell you they're absolutely brilliant and really, really not to be missed. So do check out the show notes below for the relevant links. Now, if you'd like to hear the Plus show, the simplest thing to do is to click my Linktree links below and come and join the Patreon. You can come for a month or just buy the Plus show version of this show, and it genuinely is pretty much less than the price of a cup of coffee. But if Patreon is not your bag, and I get it, it's not for everybody, and you'd like to support me, support the show, you can always pick up a copy of my book, Song of the Dark Man, Father of which is Lord of the Crossroads, the links to which are in my Linktree below. Okay, let's get on with the show. Well, Peter, it is lovely to have you back on Spirit Box. Crikey, is this third or fourth appearance? I can't remember. It's been a few.
Lost count there.
It's been a few. Lovely to see you again. I mean, we were just chatting before we hit record. We caught up in London in January, and did a week.
Otherworldly encounters.
That's right. Yeah, Watkins. Yeah, it was
for
good
which
fun.
we made a preparation. Remember, we went and seen Nosferatu to get in the mood.
Fabulous film. And that was like the biggest cinema screen I think I've ever seen. It was huge. Like,
yeah, enormous.
in Leicester Square. Great film. Great film.
If anything, it caused me to back off some of the more lurid stories, to be honest. I didn't want to take everyone down that road.
Yeah, everyone was just a little bit tense after, 2.5 hours of gothic horror.
Oh, it's all good, clean fun.
Yeah. I know he's got is it Roger Eggers? I think his name is
Roger Eggers. Yeah.
He's got a Wolfman film.
Oh, can't wait!
I know he's so good. He's just so good. Anyway, as much as I would love to chat cinema with you, we're here today to chat about your new book, which I had the privilege to read through this week. And congratulations, Peter! Wonderful piece of work.
Thank you very much.
So just to kind of help get the show on the road, can you tell people, I suppose, for those people who may not be familiar with you, a bit about yourself and this new title?
A bit about myself. That's a spacious question to kick off on, isn't it? While you finish your coffee. Let me bat that one back. I wouldn't know where to start, to be honest. I've been writing professionally now for like quarter of a century. And the research goes back at least, I don't know, over the past half century, can you believe it?
Fantastic.
Into the mysteries.
Yeah.
So there's like a accumulation of insights and connections that you make in your mind that pay off decades later when you come to focus on a very narrow, comparatively speaking, narrow area like the mysteries, and within that, for instance, the rites of Dionysus or the rites of Mithras. So the works are a cumulative effect. They're probably over-referenced, if anything, but the references are there to give other scholars guidelines, pointers, should they choose to follow those paths, tracks, so to speak, kind of carved out. And I think we're going to talk about some of the sources as we go forward, aren't we, Dara? So I don't want to get too deeply into that.
Well,
this particular book is a continuation of a stream that started with the Game of Saturn, looking at what I call the cult of Saturn, which is the cult of the demiurgus, the creator deity, in Greek mythology, Kronos. So we're not talking about the planetary intelligence or the planetary Saturn at all. Although much of the imagery, of course, is kind of shared between the higher order Saturn Kronos and the planetary signifiers. but it's a cult that I believe underpins mystery initiation in many forms. So Mithras is one of its forms of expression, has its distinctive iconographic tradition, but it's an iconography, as we'll see, which resonates back thousands of years. And it's rather like the many facets of a diamond, you know, as you turn it, you're displaying different facets of a common underlying truth or reality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's my little introduction.
I think it's a strong one to go with. Well, as I said, I really enjoyed it, and you know, we won't labor the intro too much. Let's get into it, but it does bring things together. You know, and that's one thing when I was reading it, I was like, okay, I think I understand a bit of this now. You know, which was fantastic. You know, in terms of the structure, and you really do build out that kind of history of the iconography and the importance of the iconography really well, which obviously you know you've done before in your other work. So we've kind of framed the kind of the book in its broadest sense. Getting into the detail. So one of the questions that I had when we kind of were building up to this was around, in your introduction, you state kind of you're viewing the world of the mystery cults through an essentially animist lens, and that enabled us to formulate a more adequate conception of the insider perspective. And you looked at that kind of through the idea of kind of analogism and totemism. So could you expand on that?
Yeah, I think the defining factor about the mystery cults for me is that the testimonies that we have spanning millennia coalesce around a couple of key insights. One, that the Mistai actually saw and were able to worship the gods from close at hand. And secondly, that they return with a radically different outlook on both life and death. And from a modernist perspective, this really doesn't make much sense. So that, you know, in the 1920s till about the 1950s, the predominant mode of rationalizing first-hand accounts of mystery initiation was in terms of the Jungian unconscious and the archetypal symbolism. So it was an attempt to psychologize it. And then there was a second wave of interpretive speculation, which started, I think, in the late 50s and early 60s, the discovery of mescaline and the mescaline cults in Mexico kicked off people like Aldous Huxley and others, Robert Graves, to start explaining the mysteries in terms of imbibing very powerful hallucinogenic substances. So again, there's this rationalizing tradition within first world anthropology and intellectual thought generally. In other words, the phenomena are not allowed to speak for themselves. They have to be explained away, so to speak. And what I'm trying to argue is that human culture has been, from my perspective, fundamentally animist and polytheistic for most of the last 35,000 years in which we can talk about a distinctive human culture. And that animism entails a completely different understanding and response to questions of causality and reality. So I take my lead from Philip Discola's work in Beyond Nature and Culture and the commentaries on that. And what Discola has kind of refined out of the animist perspective is that there are two forms of causal connection or causal connectivity in addition to what we would call naturalism. Naturalism being straightforward material causation. Animism opens up analogism and totemism as two additional ways in which things are connected together, bound together. And these perspectives underlie the animist perception of reality. So what I'm arguing is, without sharing that perception, we can't read the mystery cults and understand them in the sense that they were meant to be understood. So we need a much more ethnographically nuanced understanding of the phenomena to make sense of them.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I could just add one thing to that. It was back in 1930 that Ludwig Wittgenstein was reading Fraser's Golden Bough in Cambridge. And by that summer, he started making a series of notes that became remarks on Fraser's Golden Bough. And here, for the first time, a major European intellectual said, Fraser just doesn't get it. He acknowledges that the cultures he's talking about have an admirable grasp on their environment and on how to respond to it in terms of tools, survival, hunting. And yet he says, all of a sudden, they kind of fall off the cliff of rationality with these primitive rituals. And he started speculating this is a reversion to some childlike behavior. And Wittgenstein is kind of incensed at this lack of understanding. Again, it's this first world disease of materialism. It's inability to grasp other ways of understanding and responding to reality. Wittgenstein was the first one to say, apart from naturalism, material causation, you've got performative utterances and performative actions which cannot be analyzed in terms of our material causation. They exist on a different plane. So, unfortunately, his remarks weren't published until half a century later. That said, so many people visited his lectures and his notes were shared all over the, academic community. It started to filter through, but my profound feeling is that it hasn't filtered through half as much as it should have.
No, it hasn't. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like, and we even see it, even in what you would say kind of like magical and esoteric circles, where like experiential stuff is kind of still seen as kind of like quackery a little bit,
Oh, absolutely.
By kind of esotericists,
and also the psychologism is still prevalent.
Yeah.
There's whole generations of esotericists out there who are still enamored of a Jungian perspective. It's all, and yet when you challenge them and say, well, what is the collective unconscious if it's not the total field of consciousness permeating all reality? That all of a sudden expands the boundary beyond personal psychology into, and you're already halfway to animism.
Yeah.
Once you accept Jung's collective unconscious, aren't you? Anyway.
Yeah, you absolutely are. Yeah. But perhaps it's a subject for another show that we can dive into in some depth. But looking at the book and the argument you build, you have a number of you built. Actually, before we hit record, I was just kind of saying to you the amount of research that you have obviously undertaken is astonishing for this, but it's a cumulative of lifetimes of work. That's very evident to see. But kind of who and what works did you delve into? I know you looked at kind of the Neoplatonists and the kind of some African mystery cults, but you also talked to kind of like Indo-Tibetan yogic schools. Like, how did that help you, I guess, build out the kind of the cult's iconography?
Okay, so there's a real solid foundation in recent anthropology and ethnography. That's kind of a foundation stone for me. So people like Philip de Scola, Jose Gil, his work on the generation of ritual space from the body or the bodies of the ritualists. That was foundational understanding for me. ethnographies, which are classic ethnographic studies, therefore part of the scientific literature by Bruce Grindle, Elizabeth Turner, and to a less extent, Maya Deren. And then I turn to the Orphic tradition, which is captured essentially in the Orphic fragments, Plato's dialogues, especially the Phaedrus and the Symposium. And then like later commentaries thereon by Proclus. So, you know, that's an entire body of literature. And then we have the whole literature of the Vajrayana tradition in the Far East, especially the literature around the Kalachakra, the time deity itself. And that's an incredibly powerfully articulated tradition of subtle energy manipulation, channel opening, and realization. And it's also, of course, a lineage initiatory tradition over 1,000 years old, which is still ongoing today. So when we look at the mysteries, we don't just have to, so to speak, rely on historical material. This is a living tradition in some cultures. Okay? So it's accessible today. And then there's like the recent work, I especially highlight Scarlet Imprint's Bronze Vessel. The essays in there are superb. Alkistis's work in the merger of dance and esotericism, for instance.
It's fabulous essay.
You know, so it's a vast continuum of inspirations, let's say, that coalesce in these works. It's quite a complex tangle, but the kind of the thread through the labyrinth is the iconography. And essentially, I'm seeking to highlight the thread of that iconography as it develops and to, so to speak, deconstruct it, to challenge it and ask, you know, what is it that it's trying to tell us? How do we account for its continuity over different cultures for millennia? How can it be so constant? And we'll talk about that a little, I think, as we go forward. So, you know, these are some of the threads in assembling a work like this that I explore, I interrogate.
Yeah, and you structure the book in several sections, building the thesis as you go. And I kind of found it helpful to kind of structure questions based on the book sections. Let's start with the first section, origins. You mentioned that the cult of Mithras is it's usually perceived through a Roman lens as obscure, secretive military cult. And that this presupposition is inaccurate. I totally thought that. To this end, where can we trace the cult from? Where can we trace its roots?
Well, the fascinating thing I found is a passage in the Epic of Gilgamesh from around 2000 BC. Now, as most people know, one of the most iconic images of Mithraism is the Tauroctony, the bull killing scene, in which Mithras kneels on the back of the bull. He traps one of its hooves underneath a foot, and he is kind of holding it by the nostrils and stabbing it. So I was absolutely astounded to let me just read this out. It's from around 2000 BC, and it obviously is a written version of an oral tradition,
right?
That must go back, who knows how far into prehistory. But Enkidu is talking to Gilgamesh in a section called the Bull of Heaven. And he says, I will sneak up behind the bull and grab the tuft of its tail and with one foot hold its hock.
Yeah.
So there we are, very specific. He's going to hold its hock down with one foot. And then you will butcher. So thrust the sword between the neck, horns, and spine. and that's the Epic of Gilgamesh. So all the elements there are precisely mirrored in the iconography. So how do you account for that? And then around 1400 BC, we have a ring of a Hittite king, Supiliamus, and it distinctly shows, it's tiny engraved ring, but it distinctly shows exactly the action that the Epic of Gilgamesh describes. And it's almost identical to the Mithraic Tauroctony.
Yeah.
And of course, we have evidence for the deity in that very early Bronze Age period. It's of course, Persia as an influence is long in the future. Zoroastrian hasn't been invented at this point.
Yeah.
We're deep in the Bronze Age here, and we're talking about peace treaty between the Hittites and the Mitanni, 1400 BC or thereabouts, in which Mitra, Varuna and Indra are all called upon to, so to speak, oversee the treaty between the two people. So
Right.
we already have clear evidence that some kind of Mithra cult was at the center of the elite Bronze Age culture at this
Right.
point. Which again is, I don't think many people have explored this. This is like a building block of what would subsequently 2,000-3,000 years further on become recognizable as Roman Mithraism. And there's a kind of there's a representation of Nike, the goddess of victory, from about 500 BCE, therefore classical Greek representation. And again, she's in exactly the same posture vis-a-vis the bull as the earlier Gilgamesh, as the Roman Mithras. The only thing that she's holding the sword in a different way because she's representing the Sphangion, which was a sacrifice prior to a battle. Right. So for victory. So, but essentially the iconographic or the iconography hasn't altered in 2,000 or 3,000 years, even at that point in 500 BC.
Wow.
So we're talking about immensely long-lived sequences of images, and we have to ask ourselves, how is that continuity maintained? What is it, so to speak, founded on, that in pre-literate cultures it nevertheless retains its relevance? Because you can't really connect Bronze Age Anatolia with the Hellenistic world. I mean, there were several catastrophes, changes of population, and let alone how it came from that world into Imperial Rome and ends up on Hadrian's Wall in Scotland. So we're really quite challenged to understand how these ideas are so firmly fixed.
Yeah.
And, without a concept of the unconscious, which is in some sense collective, it's difficult to account for it.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful piece of inquiry that you do in that, and very revelatory. Like I genuine. I mean, like that preposition of it just being a Roman cult. I was tremendously guilty of that. So it was a real eye opener to see it go all the way back, to Gilgamesh, and there is a golden thread of the iconography as you just relayed to us. It's astonishing. Now, moving kind of forward in time and forward in the book, one of the other great sources you use to, I guess, as a mirror of sorts, is the Orphism and the esoteric tradition within Hellenism. And you kind of juxtapose where you've got similarities in, I guess, some of the certainly the language, what you phrase as the imagistic tradition, that there's an embodied, participative, and performative kind of relationship between what you call generic Orphism and Henosis. And I suppose for listeners, it would probably be worthwhile explaining what henosis is, and I guess elucidate a little bit on Orphism and what you believe its relationship with Mithraism is. It's a very long question. My apologies, Peter.
Okay, I mean, why I use the term generic Orphism is that, as you say, it's a performative tradition. And one of the important distinctions that I learned from anthropology was it was postulated by Harvey Whitehouse in a kind of seminal essay, Modes of Religiosity. And he explores the distinction between what he calls doctrinal religiosity and imagistic religiosity, where, doctrinal religiosity is about all we're left with in the West. And it's that top-down, priest-bound, canonical texts, canonical interpretations, in which your religious experience is essentially attending. Okay, you just attend, right? There's nothing more on offer, really. And I know a lot of people won't like me saying that, but that is pretty well what religion has boiled down to in the first world. And he contrasts that with imagistic forms, which have none of those characteristics, in which a performative space and ritual enact a deity's most essential elements of cult, of their mythology. And the people participate fully to the extent that they experience the deity in that space for themselves. So there's no need to explain it. There's no need to, so to speak, grade it or to place an interpretation around it. It doesn't need metaphysics. If you get the experience, however that is for you, that's enough. That's sufficient. So the weakness of imagistic forms of religiosity, of course, is they don't leave much trace. So they can easily die out unless some attempt is made to, so to speak, record the most salient aspects of the cult, which is to say, how to do the ritual and what kinds of outcome it should produce under ideal conditions. And for me, that is the way in which we're reading not just the cult of Dionysus, but the cult of Mithras now. The iconography is a direct guide to ritual practice and visionary encounter. So, that fulfills the terms of what an imagistic cult needs to survive for centuries. So the generic Orphism then is the insights need to be kind of rationalized to some extent. So, you need a concept of the eternal life of the soul. It's kind of foundational. Metapsychosis, multiple births and rebirths. The providential outreach of gods and the salvific potential of the gods and the rituals, to the extent that it tends to eliminate the fate to which souls succumb through incarnation, through encountering material reality. Okay. So those kind of 4 points are, you could even say they're applicable across almost every imagistic tradition there is. You'll tend to find those 4 key aspects. And as such, they represent a kind of synthesized wisdom of direct participative ritual practice throughout the human cultural experience. So, am I answering your question? Where did we get to?
No, I think so. I think as you said.
So, sorry, Henosis, you asked about.
Yes,
let me just finish off that one then.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you put that machinery in motion, and it is designed to absorb the ritualist awareness into the awareness of a deity. So that for a brief period of time, as an embodied human, you experience God consciousness quite literally. And when you come out of that, you're fundamentally changed in your perspective on reality, on life and death. And you now have a deeply felt sense of connectivity to these higher order beings and their perception of reality as an ongoing teleologically unfolding evolution. So you're far better equipped to participate in that process than you would otherwise be, trapped in your, kind of, so to speak, personal and local struggles. It's a perspective that your awareness never quite recovers from. Put it that way.
Yeah. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I guess. So you describe how the Orphic metaphysical underpinnings of the Mithric cult stand at the very core of its identity, specifically in association of cosmic Aeon and Phanes with the hero Mithras. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. One of the problems, again, with Mithraism's imagistic status is that apart from porphyries on the cave of the nymphs, there is no Mithraic text to refer to. So we have some Mithraic writing on the wall, which literally lists grades and planetary correspondences. But apart from that, there's no body of Mithraic textual material to refer to. If people have in mind the Mithraic liturgy, so-called, that's a quite separate issue, which we can talk about later. But it's not essentially a Mithraic text. It was designated as such by scholars, modern scholars, decided to call it the Mithraic liturgy. It's just a chunk of text embedded in the larger Greek magical papyri found in Egypt. So, let's leave that aside. It's a very complex issue. There's no distinct Mithraic text apart from Porphyry's interpretation of the iconography. But we have three iconic pieces of iconography to consider. The Tauroctony is one, obviously. We have Aeon or Phanes, and we have the Petrogenesis, the rock birth. So these three pieces of iconography give us a comprehensive picture of what the metaphysics should look like. And the one you're asking about is Aeon and Phanes. And this is a plastic, that's to say, three-dimensional or relief representation of the Orphic cosmogenesis, almost line by line. In the Orphic fragments, well, let's go back. In Hellenistic or Greek culture, there were two cosmologies. One is Hesiod's theogony. That was kind of the official birth narrative of the god. Orphism, as the esoteric current within Hellenism, had a distinct cosmology. And what the Phanes Aeon relief does is to depict that. So we have the great serpent Heracles gives birth to an egg, and the pressure within the egg builds up to such an extent it bursts apart, and the top half becomes the sky, the lower half becomes the earth, and in the middle is this bigendered figure, Phanes. Phanes just means light, illumination. So what we have essentially is a poem rendered into a physical representation which defies translation. So what we just described as the peak experience of merging awareness with a deity is the experience of that light within oneself, that complete identification of one's soul with the larger soul, which is a deity. So if you were to depict that in a form that people could, so to speak, recognize intuitively, then that would be a representation of it.
Right. And so in the next section, now you've spoken to this somewhat, but like a live girt by the serpent of time, which I love the title of.
Mm.
We spoke earlier, or you spoke earlier, to the kind of genealogy of the relevant iconographic ideas and associations with the Tauroctony over the course of millennia from the Near East to Rome, stating that it provides us with a entry into the metaphysical underpinnings of the cult of Mithras in
Yeah.
its Roman recension. Um,
Hmm.
I know we've touched on the genealogy bit. Can we talk a little bit to the Roman side of things?
Yeah. Okay. So the question really is, what is the metaphysical understanding conveyed by the Tauroctony? Why is it such an enduring image? Um, Now, the only case of full killing that I can find within the Orphic tradition is Dionysus's murder by the Titans
Okay.
whilst in the form of a bull. And really, I couldn't find another instance within the mythographic tradition of bull killing. Okay, so if it is indeed a version of Dionysus's murder by the Titans, what is the significance of that? What is the metaphysical significance of it? And we'll recall that when Dionysus, uh, um, in the form of a child, is murdered, he's playing with some toys. And the Titans who were formerly guarding him then turn against him. So he's looking into a mirror at the point at which he sees he's about to be murdered, stabbed, or whatever. And he starts shapeshifting through many different forms. And then it's in the form of a bull that he's actually stabbed. So significant elements are the Titans, the murder, and the fact that he's looking into a mirror. So they're your starter clues, so to speak. So the mirror is an important factor here because I think what they're trying to say is that for a deity looking into a mirror, just like a soul outside of incarnation looking into material reality, there's, so to speak, the draw of the sensuous to incarnate oneself again. But in doing so, you lose the primal unity, that sense of godlike awareness that you previously enjoyed. So that, so to speak, you're in a reflection now. So reality is a reflection.
Mm-hmm.
It's not reality on a spiritual level. And the murder is to the primordial unified awareness that we enjoyed prior to incarnation.
Okay.
Okay. So now the Titans in that respect are every man, or Mithras is every man. That in killing a god, um, you have a metaphor for this process whereby we incur fate
Mm-hmm.
through incarnating, literally plunging into the material reality at a specific time frame, in a specific culture and society, and within that at some level, and are then faced with a series of challenges which in a way reflect our karmic inheritance up to that point in time.
Right.
So the disambiguation of the iconography, I'm drawing on multiple sources to pull that together. Okay, Proclus, Plato, the Orphic fragments themselves. Um, but it gives you a reading which makes sense in the larger Orphic frame of things. Okay, I hope that's kind of a
Yeah.
clarification.
Yeah.
There is another aspect of the Tauroctony, which is the fact that it represents the constellation Taurus.
Yeah. That was my next question. Was the star map element to
Okay,
this?
okay,
Um, which I know, and like I think that it's such a good part of the book. I love what you've done here in the ideas. Like again, kind of building out kind of the murder of Dionysus as you describe, which I kind of viewed as like this an indicator of that longing for the sensuous, but also causes that kind of like split from the non-dual into the dual. But then you add this extra layer to it, where from kind of from Plato's work, where we learn that each soul is assigned a star, and whoever lives out his appointed time will return to their home star, and lives a blessed life. And then you kind of underpin that with this idea of the Tauroctony as a star map.
Yeah, kind of points us back to the earliest expressions of human spiritual life, like Nabta Playa in the Egyptian desert, where there's distinct evidence of ritual burials, and then the circles of stone which are carefully aligned with certain stars. And this kind of sense that we have of the merger of the macrocosm, the star-like canopy, and the microcosm, our own spiritual lives. So that has become, I think, in modernity, a huge gap that needs to be. It's difficult to make the bridge between the two.
Yeah.
But of course, in an animist perspective and in a performative and ritual perspective, you fuse these two together. Macrocosm and microcosm come together in a very powerful way. And this kind of underpins all the notions of stellar religion, which is probably one of the most archaic of religious paradigms in human cultural development.
Yeah.
So the significance of Taurus and of Perseus Mithras's stabbing the Taurus in the neck is that is the source of the or the small constellation known as the Pleiades. And from the Pleiades each summer, there's a burst of meteors. Okay, and around this phenomena, even today, there's a kind of sense that this is a healing burst of energy. So all of these levels, the personal, the Orphic iconographic, and the actual perception of the night skies are fused together in a performative context. The behavior of the night skies is, so to speak, a metaphor for and the reality of the healing flow that comes from merger with a higher order being.
Right.
And that also plays to this notion analogism. So by analogy, that logic, that imagistic animist logic, the flow of meteors from the Pleiades, from the bull, is a life-affirming flow of energy from a god to ourselves.
Talk about it as well, about the Tauroctony as being a metaphor extorting the cultists to overcome unchecked dominion of the lower appetitive or irrational soul in favor of the higher soul.
Yeah, again, it's a recurrent theme in Orphism. I'm right now just writing a chapter of introduction to Plato's Phaedrus, and it totally dominates that dialogue. It's this notion that fate and destiny are two different things, and that by incurring incarnation, we are, in a sense, subjecting ourselves to fate. This like precipitous descent into material reality lands us in a set of circumstances that we then have to cope with, and that's kind of fateful. So that it's only by withdrawing our engagement with the circumstances of material incarnation that we can get back on a path of reclaiming our unified awareness. And that is a spiritual discipline. So it's not that the human functions and actions are themselves inherently good or bad. This is not Gnosticism. It's just that the appetitive aspects of ourselves tend to indulgence. And indulgence deepens or deepens the hold of reality upon ourselves, and therefore removes us even further from reclaiming our, in Orphic terms, natural inheritance, which is, so to speak, that unified divine awareness,
Right.
from which we have ejected ourselves because we didn't take care of our material appetites in previous lives. And this again is the essence of a kind of karma, isn't it? You know,
Right. Okay.
that's what they're describing here.
Interesting.
So yeah, overcoming the domination of the bull of appetite is integral to the spiritual path, and it doesn't matter whether it's Christian mysticism, Buddhism, or Orphism. They're all saying the same thing. The unchecked play of the appetites doesn't liberate you. It further enslaves you. Okay, and that's a different thing from saying you shouldn't do it. This is not a kind of, this is not a Christian teaching here.
Yeah. It's not a punitive point.
Yeah, exactly.
So interesting. Yeah, well, wonderful. Well, Peter, as always, it's been a real pleasure. I'd love to catch up.
Yeah.
Really, really enjoyed the book. Fabulous.
Thank you so much.
And I'll make sure that I use the illustrations to
tons of excellent illustrations, Ryan.
Just to punctuate our conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a relief to the listeners.
So when is the book fully released?
Should go to the printers, hopefully, fingers crossed, next week.
Fantastic.
And I guess they'll be back from the printers, from the print shop, before the end of May.
Lovely. Yeah.
2 or 3 weeks time. I'm, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
That's where we're up to.
Okay. Well, this should be out in about kind of 2 weeks from the time of recording, so shouldn't be that long. And Theion Publishing is the best place to go and pre-order and pre-book and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lovely stuff. Well, as I said, fabulous book. Really enjoyed it. Very, very illuminating. And we've got something else to look forward to in terms of this astrophotography dual piece.
The visible God.
Yeah. And when is that likely?
Hopefully July.
Oh, cool.
Hopefully it'll be announced July. I say it's a very slim supplement.
Yeah.
But it's quite an interesting angle, really.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, that's fabulous. Well, wonderful, Peter. Thank you so much. And if people who want to follow you, find out more about your work, where's the best places to do so?
Google. Google me up.
Fantastic.
You'll be sick of it after you.
Well, thanks so much, Peter. It's been a pleasure as always.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dara. Super.
Thank you, Peter. I hope you all enjoyed that. I certainly did. I always enjoy talking to Peter. I always learn something when I talk to Peter. He has an amazing ability to combine the kind of scholarship of the classics along with scholarship of the esoteric and merge those and weave them together in such an insightful and considered way. And if you'd like to explore more of Peter's work, then do check out the links to his social media and Patreon below. I've also put the link for his book, Ritual and Epiphany in the Mysteries of Mithras. The Secret Cult of Saturn in Imperial Rome by Theion Publishing. You can find that link below amongst some of the subjects that we discussed in today's show. So do check that out. Okay, that is it from me. I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm Dara Mason, and you've been listening to The Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.